I won't spoil that by saying which movie it comes from, but maybe part of your talk. So, are we just waiting for a thumbs up from the back there? We're looking in the wee window, hoping someone's going to say, yeah, you can go. No. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, I'm just going to do a little thing that I've taken to doing as a little bit of fun when I do this kind of talk. So I've got a 360 camera here. I just want to take a 360 selfie of the group. So if you're up for it, if you're not, just kind of cower behind your hands and it's okay. So if I go 3, 2, 1, and then if you could all kind of wave your arms in the air and go, woo! It's not a video, but you are being live streamed, possibly. So you ready for it? So 3, 2, 1, arms in the air, woo! And I'll tweet that later on, so you can see how it comes out. Might just have to make do without it. I actually, fingers crossed.
I think we'll just crack on without it. If you can fix it, great.
Sorry, we're not picking the mic up in there.
Oh, okay.
Ah. Is this any better? Hello?
What the type one? Is there a button on the actual box on the mic?
How's this one? You can pick this one up? Yeah, use this one.
Okay, let's do that.
Sorry about that.
So thanks for your patience there, everybody. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this talk slightly quicker than I was going to, because we've overrun by a few minutes. But if there's anything that I talk about that you think, well, whoa, what was all that? I'd like to know more about that. Get in touch. I'll leave my details at the end. I'll be around here for a bit, so I'm happy to have a chat with you. Might not have too much time for questions. If you're wondering where that quote comes from, I'm not going to tell you, you have to Google it. But I also wonder, does anybody know what that is a picture of? It looks kind of like the stairs up into some sort of space capsule. Quick vox pop, does anybody know what it's a picture of? Ah, someone said Bristol, yeah. So it's actually down in Millennium Square at Bristol. That's a planetarium, but it looks for all the world like a spaceship, which is pretty cool, really. So I'm going to talk about 3 things, and this is it's quite lofty stuff, and hopefully follows on quite naturally from the panel discussion that we've had just now. And it's really about the tech that's coming and what our response to it's going to be. And then, of course, I'm going to drag it, kicking and screaming, back to talking about digital capability. So let's see if I can steer the ship in the... How long have I got? 25 minutes. Okay, so first of all, does anybody know what this is? Have you seen this before? I'm going to see if... Oh, I've lost my mouse, which is never good. Hey, did you see that? So
It was rather fast.
it was rather fast. Yeah. Let's see if we can do that again. Ah, I can see my mouse up here. That's
I know what this is. It's one of the first stage landing.
Let's go for that. So, that's right. So this is SpaceX. This is their reusable rocket boosters. People spent 15 years making this. This is a 15-year project. This rocket has just flown up into space and it's delivered a satellite. So a satellite's gone up into orbit. The thing we could never do before was land the rocket and fly it again. And by the way, you know, we're talking about digital capability here. Actually, you don't think that there was somebody there with a little joystick going, yeah, left a bit, right a bit. No. No, that was landed by computer. It wasn't landed by a person. But the point of that is, it reduces the cost of going into space very considerably. And we were talking earlier on about all sorts of societal shifts and changes that are happening. Right now, that $100 million rocket costs $100 million to fly up into space. And the historical model has been, it then is burnt up in the atmosphere, and it's all gone. When they get this fully working, it will cost $200,000 for fuel, and then little bit of money to refurb the rocket that's come down. And let's say ultimately it costs maybe $1 million to refurb it and refuel it. 99% cheaper. So hold on to that thought, 99% cheaper. There are going to be a lot of people in space very soon. That's why I thought it would be a good way of leading into this talk, because we don't tend to think about that. You know, space is, oh yeah, well, there's some people that occasionally fly up to a space station and they do whatever it is they do up there, and they come back down again. Isn't that great? But we're not really doing anything in space. So that's all going to change, and I think you'll find that's going to change quite quickly. Something else that has been happening, which is maybe something that you guys have actually encountered. I don't know, if anybody came to DigiFest, you might have seen our friend Pepper the robot here. Robots have become a little bit fancier, a little bit smarter than we might perhaps be expecting. So you see Pepper, you can have a conversation with Pepper. Pepper is capable of carrying out a conversation with you and understanding some simple dialogue. But it works to a script. So you'll actually encounter Pepper now in upscale shopping centres. You might encounter Pepper in an airport, in a lounge in an airport, upscale shopping mall. Might be a greeter in a store. And they're actually sold. The company that makes these has sold over 10,000 of them. So Pepper is a thing. It's just that Pepper is mostly in Japan right now. So if you go to Japan, for instance, if you go to a SoftBank mobile phone store, which is kind of the EE or the Virgin Mobile of Japan, Pepper will glide up to you at the door and say, konnichiwa, and have you thought about renewing your contract? Maybe you'd like to get an upgrade. And Pepper's kind of cute, and big eyes like an anime character. So you maybe go, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. But Pepper doesn't really know what you're saying. You can have a little bit of a conversation with it, but it is all scripted. So it gives the appearance of intelligence that isn't really there. But here's the thing, that's already working as a greeter in 140 plus SoftBank stores. And maybe it's just a gimmick. Maybe it's just a gimmick. Oh, Nestle are planning to introduce it in over 1,000 of their Nespresso coffee pod outlets. And again, maybe this is just a gimmick, but consider that it's doing a job. It is doing a job that a person previously did. And okay, the person might still be there because they have to rush out and recharge it and reboot it every now and then. But it's quite fascinating to see what it actually does now. This is where I hope the video gods are going to play nicely with me. Let's see if I can play this one. For some reason I can't see my cursor except if I look up here, in case you wonder what I'm poking around with. So this is Pepper the robot.
No rush. Take your time to close the curtains and remove any obstacles around me. Say, okay, when you think it's good.
Okay.
So, I am the robot. You are the human.
Thank you.
And this is the beginning of a beautiful story. I like humans. Humans are so cute.
I could keep one as a pet.
Stop them now, before it's too late.
So that's Pepper. And actually, you maybe you read science fiction stories or you watched movies as a kid where there are robots like that, and you thought, yeah, one day. That is actually quite like the sci-fi robots I remember from reading 2000 AD as a kid. Quite interesting, but very rigid, because if you deviate at all from its script, then it has no idea what to do. So if your thing is buying a new mobile phone, you're right in there. Here's another robot. So this is something called Betty, and Betty. Why do we have to give robots genders? That's an interesting question in itself. Betty is made by a company that was subsequently bought by Amazon. So this is Amazon warehouses now. This is what happens in an Amazon warehouse after you click buy.
Behind every online store is a warehouse full of merchandise. One is Quiet Logistics, where there are 1.5 million items stored. It's BettyBot's job to retrieve your purchase. and she can do this faster and more accurately than any human ever could.
The really amazing bit is when you see a little overhead view of all of the robots moving around, because they can move under the shelving to take a shortcut.
Using a network of barcodes on the floor, she navigates the 300,000 square foot warehouse, tunneling beneath the pods as she moves throughout the grid.
So historically, that would have been a small army of people, and maybe you've read news stories about small armies of people working in these kinds of situations. I won't play any more of that, but obviously you can go out there and you can find quite a bit more. So that was Betty. But Betty is only one part of the equation. For Amazon, there's a huge thing, which is actually that Betty lives in something called a human exclusion zone, which is the bit of the warehouse that human beings aren't allowed in. And if you want to go in that bit, you have to stop all the robots. So imagine a shelf falls over, stop all the robots to send a human in. Right now there are humans, and they work in a little cage, and the robots bring them the shelves, and the human reaches out. You can see where this is leading. The human reaches out with a hand, grabs a thing, and puts it in a box, and then the box is sent to you at home. So this is what happens when you click buy now. This is something called the Amazon Picking Challenge. So everything else I've shown you up to now, it exists. This is all stuff that's being done. It's being done on quite a large scale. The Amazon Picking Challenge is a competition. So this is a competition of leading computer science and robotics teams at universities principally. And the goal is to design the grabber, the robot arm, and the software that can replace the humans that sit in the cage. So the whole thing will be completely automated at that point. Why would you want to do that? Well, human beings, they're a bit awkward. They need feeding, they like to have breaks, they sometimes want to have a pension, and all kinds of stuff. It's all very messy. And they tend not to work 24/7. So it'd be much more efficient if we could do this. So right now there are a lot of people who, and this is actually a completely open competition. You can see all the stuff that they're submitting, you can see the results that they're getting. It's very interesting. But that's a future. That's not a right now. But if you ever thought, hey, if it all goes to pot, at least I can get a job working in the Amazon warehouse, then guess again. Also, where ultimately is all this robotics leading? And I found this wonderful picture of Jeff Bezos, the Amazon CEO, in this giant robot. It's actually him. You probably can't make that. A little face there, that's Jeff Bezos. He demonstrated this at a Mars conference last year, and this is the point really. An awful lot of this stuff, actually, there's short-term expediencies and efficiencies with existing processes, but ultimately, we're going to be trying to live in space. We're going to be trying to build colonies on the moon, probably on Mars, and we're going to need things like that. But boy, isn't it scary? You would not want to be confronted by that on a dark night. So that's a little bit about robotics, and I hope that perhaps there's been one or two things in there which you hadn't seen before. What I'm trying to do here is to try and introduce a few new themes. So I'd say a couple of words about AI and machine learning, and I did a version of this talk to the British Computer Society a couple of days ago, and a lot of people immediately went, oh, those aren't the same things. And I don't wish to suggest that they are. They're actually quite different things. Artificial intelligence is really true intelligence, and machine learning is a bit like the script that Pepper follows. Machine learning is quite specific, and it's quite context relevant. So here's an example. We often hear about self-driving cars, and a couple of people mentioned them earlier on in the session today. Where are self-driving cars? They're actually already around us. There's not very many, and they're driving around the streets of London. It's a big project just launched to go up and down the M40 corridor between Oxford and London. And there's a UK firm, Oxbotica, which is one of the leading developers of autonomous vehicle software. So actually UK might not seem like we're doing very much in this space. We're doing more than you think, but not as much as for example, Tesla, and I'll also say a couple of words about Google with their self-driving car project. Tesla already have nearly 100,000 vehicles on the road which have this thing they call autopilot. When you drive around a Tesla, if you put autopilot in, basically you're teaching the car how to drive itself. So something happens, you respond to it, autopilot goes, ah, and maybe next time autopilot can handle that situation itself. Maybe it's not the first time that a cat runs out in front of the car and you slam the brakes on. Maybe it's the fact that you've now done that 20 times, and of the other 90,000 odd Tesla owners, a fair proportion of you have also done the same thing. So a baby buggy, a child runs out, a cat runs across the road, slam the brakes on, okay, autopilot can now do that for you. So we're training the AI, we're training this machine learning construct to do these things. And actually, Tesla drivers have already driven over 140 million miles on autopilot. So again, we think that autonomous vehicles are sort of coming along in the future. This thing can't drive itself everywhere. And let's imagine that probably the majority of those miles are on autobahns, on freeways, on motorways. Let's take it into a city centre where everything is pretty chaotic. And maybe it's going to struggle a bit. But it's quite interesting to see where it's going. Also very telling to see what Uber did. So Uber decided that actually this is quite threatening for them, because Tesla's vision is that you don't own a car. Tesla's vision is that you just, page one and say, I need a car. And the car glides up to you, it sorts itself out. And so Uber, going from a company that had zero tangible assets, that's probably not true, there's an office building or two in there somewhere, but they had no fleet, have now decided that they need to build a fleet of self-driving cars. And the way they did that was by poaching a machine learning and autonomous vehicle team from a leading US university. So they just said, well, we'll buy the lot of you. We'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Very interesting thing about the power of social media, though. This is the guy who leads that team. So, we talk about social media in digital capability terms as an all-round good thing, and you can make all kinds of connections. We had that conversation about LinkedIn. Well, isn't it amazing to think, actually, Joe, the guy who runs this team, let's just message him. And that's something that social media makes possible. What message you might send to him might be quite interesting to think about. How does it learn, though? So we talked about cars learning to drive themselves. All sounds very fancy, but how does it really work? This little video shows Google's DeepMind AI. And remember what I was saying before, we call them AIs in popular terminology, but they're not really intelligent. So this is, if we wanted to be pedantic about it, we call it a machine learning model. It's learning to play Breakout, which if you're old like me, you probably wasted lots of time on, maybe in the late 70s, early 80s. And it plays Breakout. It doesn't know that Breakout is a game. It doesn't really know anything about how it works. What it knows is it wants to have a long session and maybe maximize that number up at the top. Maybe it can tell what that number is, and that's the score. So it plays the game a few hundred times. We'll just have a little bit more of a go there. And all of a sudden, it figures out, well, if I do this, just make that hole on the left-hand side. Hey, the game plays itself. It doesn't know that it's achieved the optimal strategy yet, but it will now never lose a Breakout. It will always win, it will always get the high score, etc., etc. Now you can too, so someone brings home one of those retro games consoles, you can go, right, let's get going on Breakout. I know a thing or two about that. We've talked about the Google and Tesla self-driving cars. If I can see, this might be a bit optimistic, but I'll try and navigate to...
I'm Priscilla. I want the vehicle to recognize and navigate through construction zones.
How does it work?
Our
Well, this is what the car sees.
Early to alert the car of the lane blockage ahead, and we can change lanes safely. You'll also notice the vehicle typically moves to keep a safe distance away from large obstacles.
So all those coloured
like
objects are things the car has recognised as
now
people,
we're approaching a railroad crossing, which requires
cyclists,
special care.
road cones.
Notice the red fence and railroad sign that appears to the computer as we approach the intersection. This means that we'll wait until the tracks are clear of other vehicles before proceeding.
So again, I'll stop it there, but you get a little bit of a feeling now for what the AI is doing. So what it's really doing is it's recognizing patterns. And an awful lot of what we call AI right now, and a lot of the breathless hype about it, I think it's recognizing patterns. But you've got to bear in mind that some of those patterns could be, let's say, enemy combatants, in a war situation. It's not all good stuff. And technologists have a tendency to put the bad stuff out of their minds. So let's put the bad stuff out of our minds and think about cats instead, because we're talking about the internet, and you can't really do that without mentioning cats. So here's a lovely thing which somebody did. This is an example of the stuff that's really quite bleeding edge now in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And what they're doing is they're using that technology to generate something new. So the idea of this app is you doodle a cat. It knows about a few other types of object, but let's stick with cats. You doodle a cat, and then using its knowledge of cats, it tries to make you a cat. And a fancy term for this is a generative adversarial network. It's a neural network that generates things, another one that says, that's not a cat, try again. And the first one has another go, and the second one says, nope, still not there. And then after a few thousand goes, you've got it.
Machine learning supervised by machines.
Absolutely, yeah. It's pretty weird. Actually, if you draw something a little bit crazy, you get something a little bit crazy. So there's the thing. It doesn't know that really looks more like a monster than a cat. It's just trying to make a cat-like monster, I suppose. But that generative aspect is going to be absolutely huge. And we could talk about generative curricula. We could talk about generative technologies in lots of ways. But we don't have time today. So I talked you through a bunch of stuff. And some of those things, although I've tried to keep the mood quite sort of light and positive, some of those things actually have quite profound implications for us. If we say, for example, that the folk working in the Amazon warehouse probably thought their jobs were pretty secure until the first Betty bot rolled in, and they thought, okay. And when you Google the picking challenge, you start to think, okay. There are lots of situations where these technologies that I've been talking about today could actually displace people. So I think it goes back actually very nicely to the debate subject, because we've said, right, I'm learning to do a job. 5 years from now, that job doesn't exist anymore. We've got lots of new jobs though, so DNA editing, asteroid miners, we need a lot of those right now. So what do you know about asteroid mining? Well, actually, kind of not really very much. So there's the thing. Those jobs aren't necessarily at any particular strata of society. They're not necessarily white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs. They are any jobs where what you do can be, let's say, reduced to an algorithm. And perhaps it's something that a robot can do for you. And when I showed the self-driving cars, in America there's 3.5 million truck drivers. One of the biggest self-driving vehicle startups right now is a company called Otto, bought by Uber, whose product is a self-driving truck. Tesla's self-driving truck is coming out later this year. So 3.5 million people do that for a living. In this country, 370,000 people are taxi drivers. So, these scenarios actually really directly affect those people. And in San Francisco, which of course is kind of ground zero for a lot of this, we've actually seen a little bit of a kind of popular revolt against the tech companies. So you really will see what I've called here new Luddites, people who are there lobbing stones through the window of the tech shuttle bus that's taking the folk to the Google campus or the Facebook campus. So will we see a lot more of that? Will something like a basic income come along to give people some kind of certainty in life because those things that they expected have been ripped away from them? Well, I think it's really interesting to come back to the panel discussion topic when we were talking about people having a greater sense of purpose. We were talking about self-actualization. If I get a little bit of money every week just for existing, what's my purpose? What's my goal? What's my motivation? Do we have that psychological need for a greater purpose that we've somehow got to channel. And obviously we've seen some quite tragic events in the last few days. And sometimes those impulses, that need to belong, that need to have a greater purpose, can actually be channeled into quite dark places. And there's other stuff as well. The simple spread of technology. In China, 86% of Chinese high school kids wear glasses. Now, is that because it's too polluted to go outside? Is it because everyone sits staring at screens nowadays? You know, will this be our future too? Is it because of a culture that's about precedence of learning, precedence of, let's say, perhaps even employability over lots of other things? Is that a future that we're going to see over here soon as well? So, I don't know. These things, though, they aren't very positive, and I did say I was going to try and keep the mood reasonably positive. So, I think the answer is actually, like I said before, there'll be whole new careers, and I think the challenge for us as educators or people working in the education sector is that our concept of a career is still something that's based on perhaps spending 2 or 3 years. 2 years, the real innovation, short degrees, just 2 years, on campus, obviously. And then you've learnt your profession or your trade, you've had that intensive campus-based education. What if that's all wrong? What if we actually need to make a massive pivot towards online blended learning? Well, can we do that, actually? Can we do that? That's a hard thing to do. But at the same time, of course, some of the certainties that we had about things like freedom of movement, for instance, in the EU, are perhaps not looking quite so certain anymore. So I've got a thing here. This is an Estonian e-residency card. For 100 quid, you can become, it's kind of 10% Estonian. And you can, with this, I can start up a business in trading in euros, based in Estonia. And this is actually a part of the package that the Estonian government created for their e-citizenship. And you could quite picture that it could become something that the EU licenses to offer associate membership of the EU, for instance, people like us. So right now we have this very rigid concept of being, let's say, we're British. But for the, get your credit card out, maybe £100 later, you could be 10% European, maybe more. Maybe it's quite a lot more. And what does that do to our internal psychology, our identification with countries, with states, with our, our rooting in place? So there's something very interesting going on there. But also, when we talk about learners, and we talk about recruiting and retaining people, it's often, I think, very much rooted in terms of the things that we are most used to. So we're most used to getting people from particular backgrounds in particular sorts of sizes of cohort that do particular courses that we already run. And maybe it's quite an interesting thing to think about, but there's 1 billion people coming online right now who would love to get an education. Quite literally, they would love to get an education. They would love to have the opportunities that we take for granted. And there's a lot that we can do in education to help them. So the catch is that they are just coming online. So you may struggle with a reliable power supply, you may struggle with internet connectivity, and all our world of cloud-connected apps might just be a little bit of an impedance mismatch there as well. Where we talked about AI, and we talked about that generative aspect, generating new stuff, well, quite a few of you, I think, are involved in our Learning Analytics initiative, Learning Analytics. So right now we're kind of over on the left-hand side of this diagram. We're just sort of figuring out how we can use data to improve retention, improve learning outcomes. There's a whole lot more that we could do, right up to that question actually, what happens when every learner has their own individual curriculum? How do you assess that? What does feedback look like on that? If everybody's taken a unique pathway, different areas have been reinforced in their learning. No two learners has followed the same path. And I think that's very interesting. But last couple of slides, I think there's a real challenge for us. Like I said before, the whole pivoting thing, right now, a lot of us are what Simon Wardley, I pinched Simon Wardley's diagram here, what he calls town planners. So we have strategies. If we're lucky, they're annual. If we're unlucky, they might be 3 or 5 years. Think how much has changed in the last 5 years. So we put our 5-year strategy together. There'll be an implementation plan, of course. There'll probably be working groups and committees, and you'll need to apply for budget for that. Meanwhile, over here in what Simon calls the pioneer space, people are doing stuff. They're doing all kinds of stuff which you would love to pick up on. And you know, in the edtech world, there's a real huge amount, febrile innovation right now. How does someone who works in that world of strategy and planning and annual cycles, how do they pick up something that's coming maybe from a company that is literally just a few people working out of a garage, like Google were all those years ago, like Amazon were? How do you pick that up? Simon's conceit is that there's a group of people that sit in the middle who he calls settlers, and I think that this is a room full of settlers. So right now, there are things that you guys are aware of, and you will take them back to your institution and will say, oh, you know, we went to this conference and we saw some brilliant things, take a look at this. And then what you'll hear back is, well, it's not in the plan, there's no budget for that. And you're in actually a pivotal position to say, yeah, but we can make it happen. And you know, we just need to do this. We just need this. We need a license to innovate, to make it happen. So I'll close by giving you an example. So this is a real world example. Maybe people here are familiar with Udacity, I'm sure. So last September, Udacity said, okay, self-driving cars, blow me down. There's loads of people who are interested in those. We do online courses. We'll do an online course about self-driving cars. And they went off and they talked to the motor industry. And the motor industry said, oh, yeah, absolutely. So Uber, of course, said, well, yeah, we're in. Mercedes, BMW, even one cars soon, which will be interesting. Okay, yeah, let's go for it. So they launched their course and they said, who's interested? And overnight, literally overnight, 20,000 people from all over the world said, yeah, me. It costs $2,500, by the way, and it takes several months. So it's not just like dip in, dip out again. A couple of days later, it was up to 30,000. So quite a lot of people. They can only take on a cohort of about 250 people because it's based on mentoring. So you're actually connected with, as a student, learning how to engineer self-driving cars. You're connected with a mentor in the motor industry who's working in this area. So they can't scale that too much. But that's evidence of demand. A lot of people want that. It's going to be absolutely huge. And I think this is a great one to maybe to think about on the train on the way home. How does your institution respond to evidence of demand like that? This is just one area, but it's one that I happen to have a couple of nice tweets about. You know, you could apply that to quite a few of the other areas I've talked about today. How do you turn that ship around? How do you pivot? And as I said before, I think actually that you guys are perfectly placed to make that happen. So that's been me. Thank you very much.